All right, welcome back to another episode of the Podium Pusher podcast. As always, my name is Justin, here with Brandon to talk to you guys about everything that went on in Brazil this past weekend. Brandon, how the heck you doing today?
I am doing great. Really excited to be here recording this podcast. It's been a great day so far and love recording this podcast and hanging out and talking about Formula One as always. So,
It is going to be awesome. Truly, it was a great weekend of racing in Brazil. Obviously, with the sprint race, we've got lots to talk about, but I think Brazil as a track, I don't know what it is about it, if it's at the end of the year and everyone has already lost their mind or the weather can be crazy sometimes, but it seems like even in the most dull, dominant of years, Brazil just always throws up a nice little weekend for us. And I'm here for it. I'm here for it.
yeah, it certainly does. Brazil, it's a fun track, I think, to watch racing on and I think the drivers really enjoy it as well. It's kind of, I think, a unique track layout. So it's always produces a little bit of good racing, and the weather usually comes into play at some point during the weekend. So that's always fun as well.
Sure came into effect this weekend. I thought there would be more rain throughout the weekend, but it just decided to put all of the rain from the entire course of the weekend into that one Friday qualifying session and literally turn it into night and just an absolute downpour on Friday night and then not a drop throughout the rest of the weekend. But still, there was some weather and that was awesome. Um, but clearly, qualifying was on a Friday night because we had a sprint weekend. I know you feel passionately about these things. What was your one sentence rundown from the weekend?
My one sentence rundown is that sprint weekends are in need of some changes. I like the sprint weekends from a fan's perspective. I think it's fun to get to see the drivers on track in race conditions more than we normally do on a given weekend. But I think there's just a few tweaks they need to that need to be made to just kind of make these weekends more enjoyable from the driver's side. Once again, I think the sprint race gave away too much information for the race, and no, I mean, we all kind of knew that Max was going to run away with it, but that just it just gave away a lot of information, and some teams, which I'm not going to mention them now because we're going to talk about them soon, clearly got the setup wrong for the weekend, and being in Parc Ferme, as soon as you pull out of the pits on Friday for qualifying, doesn't give the teams a lot of time to, get all the data they need and set the car up the best they can for the weekend. So that is something that I think needs to be looked at by the FIA and F1, and some changes do definitely need to be made to sprint weekends. But overall, I enjoy them. I think they're a fun thing for the fans, and it's always great to see drivers in race trim on the weekends. So
Yeah, I think like overall they're a positive thing, like with a lot of promise, but I just think they're not at their full potential yet. Like obviously this year we were at Austin for that sprint weekend, and I think I can look back on watching the sessions like from last year and from this year, and I obviously enjoyed there being more competitive sessions. Like when I'm sitting there on a Saturday, I would much rather be watching a race rather than FP3. Like that was a cooler experience for me to watch there as a fan. But I just think like the current format with like Saturday being its own day and not having any implication on the actual race. And I think especially these last two weekends in Austin and in Brazil, we've seen maybe the detriments of like Parc Ferme happening so early in the weekend. Like I think that is one of the biggest problems is how early Parc Ferme starts. And so I don't know if the solution to that is like let them change the setup for Saturday so they can have like a sprint setup and then they have to go back to what that was for the race, or if Parc Ferme doesn't happen until sprint qualifying on Saturday morning, like that could be cool. Like you finish qualifying on Friday, you're like, we could make some changes, and then like the teams get to risk. They don't get to practice this, but from the data, it could be better. So like teams could take that risk and have it start on Saturday morning with that qualifying session. I don't know. but I do think like the Parc Ferme like is definitely putting some teams in a box. And I think that's one of like the more detriments to this current sprint format that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely like the idea of like Park Ferme maybe going into effect after sprint qualifying or the sprint shootout on Saturday. I think that would be a really positive change. I think it would again add some like risk and like strategy elements into the weekend that aren't there right now. Use the data from qualifying to like make some tweaks and make some changes, but after sprint qualifying, like you're locked in. So I think that would be probably a healthy change. And if that was the change, then teams would still have a small amount of time to gather data, but they would maybe be able to use more information to their advantage, which would be fun. So yeah, overall, I think again, positive thing, but some changes need to be made. That might be a good one. But I don't think Stefano Domenicali is listening to our podcast right now. But if he is, he can take all the credit. We don't need the credit for that idea. But
Yeah, yeah. If it gets announced that the sprint format is changing for next year and that's the change, then we'll know that he really was listening. But he truly can have all the credit. I just want to see something change to that format because like I think there's so much promise in that format, but just like with the flaws right now, like there's part of me, like when I'm sitting at home watching it not actually there, that's like I enjoy the normal weekends more because I know that the Grand Prix on Sunday is probably going to have like more evenly distributed action because like everyone has got to set up the car how they were for the race and it's going to lead to the best Grand Prix. So I think we probably just need to find the balance of how can we, make all of those sessions entertaining while still, allowing for a good Grand Prix on Sunday because obviously that is the main event. And so I don't think the sprint should take away from that as much as it is currently.
yeah, I agree. Well, Justin, we've talked a lot about the sprint format. What is your one sentence rundown?
My one sentence rundown is about a man who's had a lot of success on sprint weekends this year, but perhaps had the worst amount of luck this weekend. My one sentence rundown is how on earth can one man be so unlucky? Clearly talking about Charles Leclerc. I mean, I just looking back across the last year and a half, so probably taking after the summer break last year up until now, just the amount of bad luck that he has had is crazy. Obviously, this weekend, spinning out on the formation lap and wasn't his fault, had the hydraulics failure, end up in the wall and unable to participate in the race when he was starting from P2. It's just hard to see because I think like Charles Leclerc has that wild, like incredibly bad pull to win ratio. And it's just like the talent is there. Like he is clearly a generational talent and like one of the few people who could compete with Max in a title fight right now. And it's just like him seeing him not have those opportunities. I mean, it's almost worse to see him like have those opportunities like dangled in front of his face and then see it like yanked away. Like that's almost worse than seeing him in a car that's not capable at all. But it's just my heart breaks for Charles Leclerc because the amount of bad luck and misfortune that he has had over the past 18 months has got to be some form of cruel and unusual punishment because it is rough to watch.
Yeah, it truly is, and I really like watching him race. I think he's a really, really talented driver. Like you said, a generational talent, and you know, I mean, it's really unfortunate to watch. And I think one thing that we have to ask ourselves here is how much of this can be attributed to bad luck and how much of it can be attributed to the team that he races for, Ferrari. Ferrari has, obviously kind of infamous right now for their strategy blunders and bad calls during races and stuff. Obviously, this weekend, I don't know that you could point any specific fingers at Ferrari saying like the hydraulics failure is their fault. And obviously, you can't point a finger at Charles and say that it was his fault either. But I think maybe that's one question that we should look at and probably a question that Charles is going to look at when he is thinking about where he wants to continue racing over the next uh, portion of his career.
Yeah, definitely something interesting to think about. And I think there definitely is a portion of that misfortune that comes from Ferrari, unfortunately. You can go even back to 2019 and see Shaw losing wins because of poor strategy calls from Ferrari,
Mhm.
or mishaps, that are directly in Ferrari built parts. Um, but also like in that fold, where would he go? Like I can't see him getting the second Red Bull seat. I don't think they would bring in someone that close to Max and talent level in the same team. Like I think they want to keep Max happy, and I think that would very much ruffle the feathers of Max Verstappen. So I don't think he would go there. And anywhere besides that at the moment seems like a sideways step at best, at worst, a clear step down. And so I think while there is a lot that could be contributed to Ferrari, like I think at this stage of his career, like it's one of those things that Shaw kind of just has to swallow and move on and hopes that it gets better because there's no clear exit for him right now. And I don't want to draw these parallels because it's a slightly different situation. But think back to Daniel Ricciardo's 2018 with Red Bull, where he had 7 million DNFs and his car was blowing up every single weekend. Um, and then he left to go to Renault, which was clearly a backward step. And then we have all seen how his career has gone from them because he took that step away from a top team with unreliability and some bad luck being one of his motivators. And so I think like if Shaw would were to take that same career path of taking a step back, like I think there's always that risk of stepping out of the top tier of Formula One, going back and hoping someone will catch up. I think just the way Formula One works, it's in Charles' best interest is to stay in that top tier with Ferrari.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would agree with that. I think certainly at the moment, there's not any open seats that are like clearly a better option for him. And, Ferrari has a lot of new leadership this year. And, I think sometimes it takes a bit for new leadership to gel and kind of implement the policies and procedures that they want to have in place. With Fred Vasseur now at the helm of Ferrari, this is his first season doing that. So I think there just maybe needs a little bit more time for Ferrari, but I definitely agree with you in the sense that if Charles took a step away from Ferrari and kind of left that top tier, there's a real possibility that he would never make it back. So yeah, something definitely interesting to think about. But I think I think you're right. I think staying put for Charles is the best thing for him right now.
But all is not bad for Ferrari because they actually closed the gap to Mercedes in the constructor standings this weekend. I thought with Ferrari with Charles Leclerc having that DNS and not even partaking in the race, that this was a great opportunity for Mercedes to capitalize and really solidify themselves in P2 with only two races left. But the gap is only 20 points now. With George Russell eventually having to retire and the pace of the Mercedes being such that Lewis Hamilton can only finish P8. Carlos Sainz's P6 helped them close the gap to Mercedes in the constructor standings. So I think with two races, anything is possible, and I think that would be very good for Ferrari if they manage to take that P2 off of Mercedes. Clearly, uh, they have so much money that it's not even necessarily about the money, but having that momentum and taking away P2 could be massive for like the inner workings of that team going into the winter break.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think that, I was kind of expecting Mercedes to take a big jump as well this weekend, maybe extend their lead a little bit, but it was kind of just surprising how much off of the pace they were. They honestly were not really in play at all during the weekend, and that was really surprising. I definitely really expected George to do well. Maybe that's a little bit of bias from, his win here in Brazil last year. That's coming into play in my mind, but um, George definitely, yeah, he just did not have a good race, and it seemed like the entire race they were just Mercedes was kind of, I don't know, George and Lewis were racing each other and they weren't really making team orders and making smart moves team wise. So, um, good job for Carlos for taking advantage of that. And yeah, it'll be a tight race to the end, which is really exciting.
It's just crazy. It's another one of those weekends where Mercedes just didn't look like the team that won 8 constructors titles in a row. Like they just have been having a lot of those weekends the last 2 years where operationally they're not at their best and they're not maximizing and they miss the setup more than they usually used to. And so it's just been weird to see like they have really lost some key personnel over the past few years. They made a driver's change. There's just like little things that change in Mercedes that on the surface of it wouldn't seem like they would have that big of effect. But maybe we're seeing uh, Mercedes lose some of the strength that they had towards the beginning of the turbo hybrid era. So, but with Vegas coming up, uh, truly anything can happen. So, I'm excited to see who ends up coming out on top in that battle for P2.
Absolutely. Vegas is coming up soon, and that's super exciting because it's a new track that nobody has ever driven on before. And whenever we get to race in a new place with a brand new track, it's super exciting.
Talk about a team that's got a Mercedes engine in the back of their car, and maybe even embarrassing Mercedes a little bit with how their performance was this weekend. At least the performance from one of the drivers, because there's a pretty big discrepancy between Lando and Oscar, and I think that's kind of just really been going under the radar the past couple weekends. But after the gap between them being really tight for a couple races, the gap has been big between them, almost as big as it's been for quite a few races over the last couple of weeks, and Oscar Piastri just did not have as great of a weekend as Lando Norris did.
Yeah, it's interesting to watch, maybe I mean we talked about it a little bit last weekend, but I think maybe it's a little bit of Lando's experience coming into play and his consistency. Lando's always been a really consistent driver, and that's an incredibly valuable uh, trait to have as a Formula One driver. And I think that's really coming into play here. Whereas Oscar's still kind of figuring it out, and when he makes a mistake, he's not as quick to recover, not as not not as able to adjust on the fly, kind of as much as Lando is. So I think that Lando is good at kind of seeing opportunities and seizing them in the moment, and Oscar's still kind of figuring that out. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, Oscar, I think still a great driver, but he's very young. So I think that's showing.
Yeah, still definitely a great driver, and I touched on it some last week, but definitely excited to see what he does next year with the full season under his belt and the off season of development that he gets to have going into next year. Definitely excited for that, and I think you're right that we're just seeing Lando's experience and his familiarity with the team and the car, just and his consistency, just for sure, being a uh, big thing that's helping him get the edge over Oscar in the teammate battle right now, for sure. What are your thoughts on Haas? They didn't have a great weekend this weekend, but all looked pretty promising for them at some point. What are your thoughts on what's going on in the American team?
Well, I think Gunter has probably spent a lot of the last few days on the phone with Gene. Um, is I think what's happening right now. I don't know. Yeah, they seemed, kind of on track maybe, in qualifying they've been, quite uh, I don't want to say incredible this year, but they've been quite good this year with in qualifying pace. And Nico Hulkenberg has been able to spin it into Q3 a few times, and I think K-Mag has been in Q3 maybe once or twice this year. So again, kind of looking a little promising throughout FP1. But both cars in both qualifying sessions, they made it into the Q2 sessions, and the highest race finish on the weekend ended up being a P12, which is not good for the Haas team. So I don't know what it is, but the race pace certainly wasn't there this weekend, and it'll be interesting to see final two weekends if they're able to kind of get things together, or it'll be kind of like a sputtering finish to the end. Um, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, definitely an interesting time at Haas right now. I can't believe that they're last in the constructor standings. Like if you look back at most of the year, like I think a lot of people would say that they had the better car than Alfa Romeo, that they had the better car than AlphaTauri, and I mean Williams is kind of like an outlier. No one really knows how good the Williams is. But like I can't believe that they've fallen to last place. I don't know how it happened. Do they just quietly went about their way being awful for like 8 weeks in a row, and everyone like forgives them because Nico Hulkenberg, yay, and Gunter Steiner's funny, and we want has to be good. Uh, I don't know how they ended up 10th. Like they were in eighth place just a couple weeks ago, and then they've just none of their upgrades have worked how they thought. They have just not capitalized on opportunities, and now they're in last, which is not great for a small struggling team like them. But I just think they like had the opportunities for more this year, and now they're going to finish last, and that's crazy to me.
Yeah, it's wild. It seems like they've just been, kind of slowly slipping away under the radar, and just it's a bad weekend here and a bad weekend there. But now it's been like maybe 10 of those kind of bad weekends, and it's all compounding. And it is unfortunate because, you know, we are Americans. I like having an American F1 team. I like Gunter. I like um, K-Mag and Nico. They're great drivers, but it's unfortunate that they can't seem to piece everything together when they need to.
It's crazy. I don't know where the road ahead for them is because go back a couple years, they were like, we're really bad. We need money. Let's get two rookies that will get us money and we can build a better car and figure out where to go to there. So they get Mick Schumacher and Nikita Mazepin. And then they're really bad. Uh, and so they bring in Kevin Magnussen because of outside circumstances. And the car's like quick for a couple weeks, but they're like, okay, now we got to get rid of Mick Schumacher so we can capitalize when the car is quick at the beginning and not have anyone crash and cost us money. So they bring in Nico Hulkenberg, and then the car's not even quick at the beginning of the year. There's nothing to capitalize on. So like, where do they go from here? They've made all these like changes like in the hopes of success over the past 3 or 4 seasons, and the success is not coming. So I don't know what the next step is for Haas, but the future doesn't look super bright.
It seems like the past couple years, 2, 3 years have just been a bunch of sideways steps in preparation to step forward, and we're still waiting for the step forward. So I don't know necessarily when that's going to happen or now if that's going to happen, but time will tell.
I'll tell you who did take a step forward in their career was Pierre Gasly. He was chilling at AlphaTauri for a couple of years, decided to sign with Alpine, and there were a lot of talk in the F1 community that Esteban Ocon was going to beat him, and that's just the way it was there. Like he wasn't as good as Esteban Ocon, and in my mind, I said, "You guys watch. Pierre Gasly is a great driver, and he's better than Esteban Ocon." And here we are. He has been quietly going about his business. He's going to beat Esteban Ocon in his first year in the team unless something absolutely crazy happens. And I just think that's incredible. Like, I feel like Alpine, like, we haven't talked about them in like 3 race rundowns because they don't do anything all weekend long. They just go about their business and finish like 8th to 12th every single weekend.
Yeah.
Um, and so here we are talking about Alpine for the three Alpine fans that exist on the planet. But uh, but yeah, I just think like Pierre Gasly has gone completely under the radar, and he's just been putting in a couple solid performances here in a row and has built that gap over Esteban Ocon. And I think it's pretty impressive that he's going to beat Esteban Ocon, who is now in his fourth year with the team, um, in his first season with the team. So I think it's pretty impressive for Pierre, and he should be quite proud of himself.
I think so too. I think, I agree. There was a lot of talk when Pierre made that switch of like, okay, like, uh, where is he going with this? Like, Esteban's gonna beat him. Like, And then Alpine had some unfortunate things happen in the first half of the season, personnel changes with Otmar leaving, and they crashed into each other and ruined a good result at um, Australia. So it was like I feel like that story was kind of perpetuated a little bit of like why did Pierre make this decision? Not a good one, you know. Alpine was at best a sidestep, not a step forward, and um, leaving the Red Bull family, cutting ties, all these things, whatever. But, I think Pierre quietly proving the doubters wrong, which he's always been a consummate professional, someone who doesn't like a lot of, fanfare and that kind of thing. And, he's just putting his head down and getting the work done. So yeah, it's always good to see from Pierre. Always been a fan of him since he's been, in the Red Bull family for a long time now. Not anymore, but good to see.
Hopefully, Alpine can take a step forward and we can see both of the drivers fighting up at the front. I think obviously like that's what we want is more midfield cars to join that fight at the top. I think would be awesome to see them like fighting with the McLarens and everyone next year. So hopefully they can take a step forward and give the drivers platforms to show off their abilities. I think even though Pierre's going to be like, I don't think Esteban Ocon is a bad driver. Like I think he is an above average driver as well. So it'd be cool to see what he could do in a competent car as well. Um, Maybe they can do an Aston Martin step forward to the top of the field. And Aston Martin had a good weekend this weekend. Had a couple bad weekends, but they were back this weekend. What do you think of that?
I think it was great. It was awesome to see Fernando and Lance, up at the front again, especially Lance, somebody who's been, struggling a lot, especially of late. And, to see him up at the front qualifying P3, that was pretty cool. Um, maybe it isn't all his father's money. Maybe there's a little bit there. But yeah, and then, Fernando obviously had a great weekend, finished on the podium, beat Sergio Perez by 53 thousandths of a second to the podium, last podium spot. That was an exciting thing to watch. Um, but interesting piece of information about this weekend for Aston is they reverted to old specs of the car. So, specs from earlier this season. So they revert to old specs, but they get good results, which is always a great thing. Good results are awesome. They help the team, make more money. They've kind of gotten back into play with McLaren. I think they're only like 21 points behind McLaren in the constructors. So that's exciting. But how does that bode for next year's car? Are we going to see Aston back up on top at the beginning of the season next year? Kind of after hearing that piece of information, I kind of think, I don't know, maybe not, but we'll see. So, kind of, interesting development there. Aston had a good weekend, but it was with an older version of their car. So,
Definitely makes me nervous for next year's car because you would think almost that like the upgrades that they put on their car this year, they're confident in them working and would like as they're thinking about next year's car would also like implement those ideas into the planning of it. And then if it's like they gotta scrap those upgrades, then who knows what that means for their progress of developing next year's car. And also like everyone has like stopped upgrades on their car, and like Aston Martin is still messing around trying to figure this out. So who knows where they stand going into next year as well. So that'll be interesting to see for sure. Keep the Aston Martin talk going. Who's your podium push for the weekend, Brandon?
my podium push of the weekend is none other than Fernando Alonso. The only time he was beaten the whole weekend by his teammate was in qualifying for the race. Lance beat him by about 4 hundredths of a second, and they were qualified P3 and P4. So good qualifying showing by Fernando in P4. And then he finished ahead of Lance in the sprint and in the race. And then obviously that incredible overtake on Sergio Perez on the last lap and, drag race to the line um, to get that podium spot was amazing to watch. And, that was between two of some of my favorite drivers, Sergio and Fernando. So that was awesome. And just kind of a great return to form for Fernando. I hope that boosts his confidence for the last couple weekends because I definitely love to see another Fernando Alonso podium before the end of the year.
I bet he can probably pull one off. I think he's got a good shot here at Vegas. His experience will help him out some, I think. But yeah, definitely
Yeah.
a great weekend from Fernando. Good to see him back to form. My podium pusher this weekend got to be Max Verstappen. He uh, did not get pole for the sprint race. Unfortunately, that went to Lando Norris, but he started P2, took the lead right away, pole for the main race, uh, and led the main race from the start. There was like those two laps where Lando Norris like caught up to him and got in his DRS. And then Max was like, okay, that was fun. And then checked out. And his win was never in doubt. I think he was just cruising the whole race and just controlling his pace. And I just, man, is flawless. I mean, he just is a robot, doesn't mess up. So great weekend for Max Verstappen. What else is there to say?
There truly are no words. Max is incredible. 17 wins on the season. Um, that's that's amazing. So there's nobody more deserving of the win this weekend than Max after the season he's had so far. So hopefully we'll get to see at least one more of those. I'm thinking we'll probably see two more of those Max Verstappen wins, but you never know.
Yeah, if you include sprints, which obviously the stats don't and shouldn't, but that's 20 wins this year, which is nuts. Uh,
Yeah.
like even 21, I think. Yeah, 21 wins now. So that is crazy. Absolutely insane. Um, other end of the spectrum, who's your back marker of the weekend?
The back marker of the weekend has got to be, and I know we've talked about this team a lot performing poorly, but it just keeps happening. So my back marker of the weekend is Guan Yu Zhou. Um, he just didn't have it together all weekend. And the yeah, I know Haas didn't have it together either, but if Alfa Romeo continues making these mistakes, there's a possibility that Haas could snag. I mean, they're only 3 points behind him. So if Haas can snag 3 points in the last two races, which again I'm not sure is possible, but if they can, they might be able to leapfrog him in the constructor standings. So that'd be crazy. But yeah, Guan Yu's highest finish between all of the quality sessions in both races was a P17, and that was a DNF. So in the Grand Prix. So it's kind of number one, it's sad to say that your highest finish over the weekend is a P17. And on top of that, for that P17 to be a DNF, that's not great. So again, seems like there's potential there at Alfa Romeo, but just can't hook it all together. Um, so it's unfortunate because I like Guan Yu, and I think he's a good racer, and I think it's cool that he's representing his country on the grid as the only driver from China, and that's pretty cool. But if he can't, do better than this, then maybe Alfa Romeo will look somewhere else eventually.
Yeah, definitely not a great weekend from Alfa Romeo all around, but Joe did not have a good weekend for sure. And just especially with Haas having the problems they did this weekend, this was, a great opportunity for them to truly solidify their place in the constructor standings. But to just go into those last two race weekends with the uncertainty like that is not ideal. My back marker of the weekend got to be Kevin Magnussen. Just continued poor performance, and then the turn one incident being his fault. And taking out your teammate. Just that's rule number one in Formula One, and you can't be doing that. And just you know, creating that situation that affected so many people's races. You got to be back marker of the weekend after a performance like that.
It's unfortunate. Yeah, that turn one incident definitely. I think the blame falls on Kevin there, but um, hopefully he can have a better weekend next weekend in Vegas. I know all the drivers are looking forward to racing in Vegas for first time in a very long time. I don't think any of these drivers have been around the last time F1 was in Vegas. But hopefully Kevin can have a good weekend, maybe a little luck, and have a good weekend in Vegas.
All right, let's run through our predictions really quick and see how good we did. My two predictions first was Lando Norris back on the podium, which happened. Second prediction was AlphaTauri scores points but does not overtake Williams in the constructor standings, which also happened. Two for two from Justin this weekend. Let's go.
Yes, a great weekend for you in terms of the predictions. Unfortunately for me, not a great weekend. My first prediction being Mercedes finishes on one of the podiums. Figured I had pretty good chances with 6 available podium spots, but Lewis and George disappointed me, like they usually do as a Red Bull fan. So I was no on that one, and then McLaren outscoring Aston Martin by 25 points over the course of the weekend. Um, McLaren actually only outscored Aston Martin by 1 point this weekend. So I was definitely off the mark on that. Fernando and Lance Stroll's resurgence definitely kind of ruined that for me, but happy to see 3 out of the 4 of those guys do well. So
Very contrasting fortunes for our predictions this past weekend. Let's see if we can make some better ones for Las Vegas. I'm saying no Aston Martins finish inside the top six of the race. Uh, I don't know if I truly believe this or even want it to come true, but I think there's a chance that Brazil was kind of one off, different setup, Mercedes getting it wrong. Uh, and I think there's a chance that it was kind of like a one-off false hope type deal. So I'm gonna say no Aston Martin's finished inside the top six of the race. Um, and then Daniel Ricciardo points. Didn't really get to talk about him this podcast or AlphaTauri in general. Great weekend from Yuki Tsunoda, double points. That's awesome and huge for AlphaTauri. But like in the race, you saw it. Daniel Ricciardo had better pace than Yuki. And so it's like it would have been crazy to see what he could have done if he didn't have that unfortunate lap one incident. So I think he's pumped about Vegas. Spent all that time in the simulator recovering, would be shocked if he wasn't turning laps around Vegas during that time. Uh, and so I think he'll have a good weekend and end up back in the points.
yeah, I like that prediction. I know how excited Daniel was when they announced that Vegas was on the calendar this year. They announced it last year. Daniel was super excited. And I think you're definitely right. With all that time off, even in the first half of the season, Daniel's got to be spending some time in the simulator in Vegas, gathering data for the team and having a good time too. So I like those predictions. My predictions are I'm going to say Mercedes in the top 6 of the race. They finish one of them finishes P6 or better. Um, I think kind of same thought that you're having about Aston Martin doing well, I'm having about Mercedes doing poorly. I think if Mercedes gets a little bit more time to get the setup right in Brazil, maybe they do a little bit better. And in Vegas, they will have that time. So I am going to count on them to finish in the top 6 of the race. And then my second prediction is Pierre Gasly scores points in the race. We talked about it earlier, but he's been having a quietly good season, especially the second half of the season. I expect Pierre to carry that momentum into Vegas and come home with some points. So we will
And
see.
we're saying P10 counts to that. He can score a point, and you're still right.
That's kind of what I was intending. Yeah, P10
Okay.
or better. But
All
we
right.
could say P9. I mean,
No,
I did put
I'll
points.
I'll give you the P10. I'll give you the P10 because if we say
Okay.
P9 or better, we're basically guaranteeing that he finishes P10. So
Right.
we'll we'll,
That's
we'll
true.
give you the whole spectrum so he can potentially have a better weekend than that. Uh, But with that, that is it. That is the Brazilian Grand Prix. Covered everything that happened in Sao Paulo this weekend. What an incredible weekend of racing that it was. Awesome to be here and talk about it. Before we depart, Brandon, parting podium thoughts. What have you got for him?
Parting podium thoughts. I'm looking forward very much so to the race in Las Vegas. In our time locally here, it'll be on at midnight Saturday night, which is kind of cool. Um, so racing in the US once again is going to be great. And then I'm also excited to record some other content for you guys next week and talk about our experiences at the US Grand Prix a couple weeks ago. So lots of good things, lots of good content coming up uh, for you guys, and lots of good racing coming up for everybody in Formula One. So those are my parting podium pusher thoughts.
A lot of good things coming up. We're excited for it. Gonna be awesome. Thank you so much for listening. We can't wait to talk to you guys again soon. See ya.
Later.